All right. Hey guys, my name is Jared Arkfield. I'm the ASCG Vice President, and this is a quick presentation on what is it actually like to apply for a PhD program. So this is just a little bit of the facts about what goes on for applying to PhD programs and some anecdote because I just finished the process. So first off, here's a few topics in a sort of chronological order. Number one, you first have to decide to apply for PhD programs, and I urge you to consider, are you sure? Because it's a pretty big decision and there's a lot that goes into it. So after you decide, yes, I do want to apply for a PhD program, you have to figure out which schools you really want to go to. So what do grad schools look for? There's a few main things. First, your GPA. So different grad schools will have different cutoffs, and these are usually not listed anywhere, but you can kind of get a feel for it doing your research. Your letters of recommendation, typically this will be three. Some schools will allow you to submit between four and six if there's extra space, and undergraduate research. So these are the three most important parts of your application. On top of that, there's the GRE, which is the Graduate Record Examination, and your SOP, which is your Statement of Purpose. And here's where there's a bunch of key things to mention. So what all goes in the application, and then now you're done. What comes next? So first off, deciding to apply for your PhD program. It is a lot of work and you're not going to get paid very much. You're going to be working for a long time. So this is one of the drawbacks. If you enter into industry directly, then you may not be working as much and your pay will certainly be quite a lot higher. So I urge you to talk with professors and grad students to see what their life was like during their 5 or so years as a PhD student. So which schools, how do you determine what schools you want to go to? Number one is your research interest compatibility. So are you going to apply to a school with programs that you're just not interested in? Nope. Second, and this one was pretty big for me, is location. If you look at the comic at the bottom right, you can see why. So there's grad schools all around the country and all around the world that you can choose from. And you need to consider, will I be happy living in the frozen north of Minnesota, like I might, for the next 5 years? Or would you choose the sunny beaches of Santa Barbara, which is also on my list? So another thing is living expenses. The grad stipend is around 30,000 per year, depending on the location. So more affluent areas with higher living expenses generally have a little bit more, like a little higher funding per PhD student, and also name recognition. So if you are intending to go into academia at some point, or if this is even just a possibility, it may be helpful to have or to apply to schools with higher name recognition because this can pay dividends later down the line. So what do grad schools look for? Like I said earlier, top three: GPA, letters of recommendation, and undergraduate research. If you have any publications, this is a huge plus on your application. A little bit less important is your statement of purpose, your resume, and your GRE. And the GRE is becoming increasingly less important. And this is a good thing, in my opinion. I'll explain why in a little bit. And two things that are not super important for graduate school are co-ops/internships and other work experience if they're not really related to research. So the GRE. Huge disclaimer, there's a pretty good chance that the GRE stops being used after this year. When I took it, I studied during the summer and took it in August, sent it off to all my schools. And then due to current circumstances, pretty much all schools in the country made the GRE optional. And two of the seven that I applied to actually just did not accept my scores. So I sent them in and they just did not connect my scores to my profile. So that was a bit of a bummer. Oh well. It tests three subjects. There's the quantitative, which is math through trigonometry, and a little basic probability. This is scored from 130 to 170. There's verbal, which is reading comprehension, and vocabulary, also 130 to 170, and analytical writing, which is two essays, which are the argument essay and the issue essay, where you'll be giving a prompt and you have to write an argument for or against something, and then there's an issue where you also discuss the issue. And each of these has two sections, but there's also a third section for either the quantitative or the verbal, which is like a test section that doesn't actually count, but you don't know which one does not count. The test is 4 hours long with a short 15-minute break. During that break, most people, me included, will inhale some lunch and then get back to it. So the GRE is actually an adaptive test, and it gets harder if you do well. So if you move on to the second section of the quantitative and verbal and notice that the questions are quite a bit harder, that means that you did really well in the first section, and that's pretty good. Lastly, the question types are very, very, very predictable. In my experience, there's only about 4 different question types for each of the quantitative and the verbal sections. And since the GRE is meant to have very homogeneous scores across a 3-year period, the tests do not change very much at all in the style that they are written. So once you practice a lot, then the question types are super predictable and you know exactly what the test is asking. So how do you study for the GRE? The best way is definitely just studying with repetition and drilling vocabulary. Studying for the GRE is probably not the best word. I would say practice is better. So the question formatting is really tricky, but as I was saying, it's very predictable. And this is where the practice comes in. The first time that I took the test, a practice test, I went over on each section by 5 to 10 minutes. And after learning how exactly the test works, what each question really means, because they're mostly kind of trick questions, then I was able to finish in half to 2/3 of the allotted time and then take a nap during the rest. So most of the studying for the GRE is learning to quickly and accurately figure out what exactly the question wants. Another thing, the vocabulary is hard. There's a lot of it, and you probably will not have seen 2/3 of the words that they ask you. So I urge you to start early, make flashcards, and use online GRE vocab sites. During the summer, I would spend a few hours a day just scrolling through different online flashcards, and it paid dividends. Lastly, the writing sections are a race against time, and there's a really high correlation between the essay length and the score you get. It's between a 0 and a 6, and roughly the number of paragraphs that you write is correlates strongly to your score. So take that as you will. And the writing section is actually graded by a human and a computer. And if the scores are close enough, then they'll take the average. If they're far enough, then they add a second human and then get rid of the computer grade. So there's 2 free tests on the ETS website. And since the GRE is completely online, except for the writing that's graded by a person, it will get graded instantaneously. So these 2 free tests will tell you exactly, like in an instant, what you got on it. And it also is adaptive, like I mentioned earlier. So you can get used to the testing format pretty exactly how it's going to be. And I recommend studying for 6 or more weeks. And for me, this was during the summer, right after unit operations lab ended, and I took the test just before this past fall semester began. So what is your SOP? It's your statement of purpose, and here's where you can tell your story. So why do you want to go to grad school? Why are you in whatever school a good match? You have the opportunity to talk about potential PIs, which is the professor you'll be working under. And I cannot emphasize this enough. This is super, super important. So people love reading that you're interested in their work. And I recommend that you give a shout out to 3 or 4 professors that you'd be interested in working with. So do really thorough research on what exactly they're researching. Don't just say, oh, I want to go work with Dr. Martin because he does membranes and membranes are pretty cool. Now actually go and read what he's doing. Read a few of his most recent research papers and discuss that a little bit. So that shows that you went in a little more depth than just, the front page of their website. You also want to discuss why your background makes you qualified to conduct research with them. So if you look on the photo on the right, this is a picture of my grad student doing work in Dr. Ducker's lab. I unfortunately didn't have a picture of myself, so he's going to have to serve as a substitute. But I was able to talk about the research that I do with surface chemistry and my SOP because there's actually a lot of overlap between that and other fields. And you can also discuss your undergraduate research and other relevant experience. This one is huge. I have a massive paragraph about all my undergraduate research in my SOP. So what goes into the application? If you look on the right here, this is an actual screenshot that I took from my Santa Barbara application. And here are just a bunch of different sections. So first off, there's just a ton of demographic info. This takes like 20 minutes to fill out, and it's pretty mindless. There's the GRE, the SOP. Often there's a supplemental essay. These can vary a little bit school by school, but it's usually a diversity statement or something adjacent, or a personal statement. There are letters of recommendation. Typically, there's 3. Sometimes they can go up to 6, though. And you want to get your letters of recommendation from professors that you have more personal connections with. So I have mine from Dr. Ducker, who I do research with, Dr. Martin, who advises the ChemiCart team, for which I'm the team lead, and Dr. Matson, because I want to study polymer engineering, and he's my polymer chemistry professor who I've had multiple classes with. So there's also undergraduate degree info, which is school GPA, what all you did there, awards, honors, scholarships / fellowships. Again, this is pretty easy. What is not shown clearly here is how long this actually takes. And it is deceptively much. I thought that it was going to take me a couple days per application. This was quite an understatement. I worked much, much longer on each application than I was anticipating to. And also, each application costs between $75 and $125 in application fees. And that's kind of a bummer, but such is life. So now you're done, you finished all your applications and hit submit. So what do? Well, first off, welcome to limbo. Grad schools will get back to you anytime between the moment that you submit your application and April. I heard back from my first one in 13 days. My roommate heard back in 2 days. And one of my friends in the previous year heard back shortly before April for a program that he applied to in December. So I urge you to take a deep breath, enjoy the weight finally off your shoulders, and be patient. So if you're accepted, schools will fly you out and put you in a hotel for a visiting weekend so you can tour campus, go through different labs, meet professors, talk to grad students, and they'll try to convince you to matriculate. And this year, everything's virtual, of course, but in the future, they should be flying you out and all expenses paid. All right, so here's just a general timeline. And like I said, it's all very approximate, differs by the school. So first off, you decide to apply for your PhD. This is sometime before the fall. I'm recording this in January, so maybe not, you don't have to decide right now, but before the summer would probably be a good idea. So next, you can study and take the GRE. You might want to start right after you finish health semester, and this will be in May. And if you take ULab during the second half of the summer, I would highly suggest you start in May. And then you can begin your SOP and your essays, and this can be right after you're done the GRE, or even during the GRE studying period. But I found that August and September was a pretty good time to do it. And you want to ask your recommenders for letters at least 3 weeks before the due date. So everyone's really busy during the semester, and 3+ weeks is just courtesy, so they have plenty of time to get it in. Don't be that guy or girl that waits until the day before to ask for letters, because then your professors are not going to be very happy. So you want to complete your SOP and your essays, and finally, as applications, sometime before everything's due. I would recommend a week or so. Make sure you don't wait until like the last hour, because one thing that I found out that almost bit me in the butt was that there's time zone differences for some of these schools. So if you wait till the last hour, it may actually be a little too late. So lastly, you're going to submit your applications. Again, if you do it 1 or 2 days before you do, then you can avoid that potential hiccup. And then decisions are released sometime between December and April. So here's a few resources that I would recommend checking out. This website for GRE vocab practice is the one that I use to study. Here's a link to the ETS GRE practice tests. MIT ComLab has a very, very good set of articles about writing your statement of purpose and other essays for grad school. So I highly recommend checking that out. I used it like way too much when I was writing my SOP and personal statements, etc. Here's a database that I found that compares PhD stipends to living expenses. And so what this lets you do is you can see the excess amount of money that you have. So you can see which schools offer the greater, marginal stipend per living expenses. And also, if you have any questions at all, feel free to contact me. Here's my email. If you have a simple question, shoot me an email. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you have a lot of questions, I'm more than happy to set up a Zoom call whenever. All right. Thanks, everyone.